to be here, not just as keynote speaker, but a great honour to be co-chairing the conference as well. But also a pleasure to be here and joining in many of the sessions that I've already attended and look forward to attending over the next couple of days. I would like to continue our discussions beyond this conference as well, so my email address is up there. If anyone does want to contact me to continue our discussions, then please do feel free to do so. As you just heard, I work at Birkbeck, which is a college at the University of London, which specialises in working with mature students, which in the UK means over the age of 21, studying part-time. So our student base is one that's really important to me, too, in thinking about lifelong learning. So what I'm going to do is to give a fairly formal lecture with the title that's up there, but then there'll be time for some discussion afterwards, and I look forward again to those conversations. What I'd like to do though, before I move into a lecture, is to begin with a story. And as all their stories begin, once upon a time. Once upon a time, a girl child was born to a working class Jewish family living in the East End of London. There was much rejoicing and celebrating at the birth of this, the first child of the family. The child was loved, grew up and went to school, doing the things that girl children do. Through her family and through her friends, through her school and through her community, through her reading, through her playing, she learned what was expected of girls and how to become a young lady. She learned that her place in the home, at work and in the community would be different from that of boys. She left school at 15 to do a secretarial course at a local college and went on to become practiced at being an office wife before she became a real one. Because, I have to add, as in all the best stories, she married and had some children of her own. So that should be enough for a happily ever after. But the girl became a woman who was sometimes restless, dissatisfied, bored and frustrated, despite loving her family dearly. She began studying at her local college. She enrolled with the Open University, completed her degree, did voluntary work, did teacher training, did an MA, and then a PhD. She started lecturing, read, wrote, built a career. She learned that she could do all of these things if she did them part-time, whilst continuing to be a full-time wife, mother, daughter. In addition to her formal and continuing education, she learned in many ways, whilst bringing up children, learning from them and with them, sometimes in spite of them. She learned through women's groups and with her friends, and later through her grandchildren. Now she learns as a professor of lifelong learning and gender with a Pro-Vice Master, similar to a Vice Provost in the US, at Birkbeck. A textbook case to illustrate the benefits of lifelong learning? Perhaps I am. But despite my success, my story is embedded within structures and organisations that are gendered, racialised and classed. My lifelong engagement with learning took the path it did, both because of and in spite of the fact that I was a young mother of two from a working class background. I count my meaningful educational experiences as beginning with that first step into college when I was 26, soon after the birth of my first child. Had I been someone else, in a different place, maybe a different time, I would have been starting my career as an academic at that point, not just beginning as a student. However, I also learned that although I thought education was not for the likes of me, I was, and I continue to be, a lifelong learner, although, as I'll go on to show, that in itself is a problematic term. As many feminist writers have shown, individual biographies are in part found through experiencing the gendered, classed and racialised socialised situation in which we're all located. Geographies of power, globalised and localised, are central to the reproduction of social inequalities, with it being in the interests of more powerful groups to fix other groups within less powerful spaces. Place can be understood as a rich and complex interplay between people and environment, with dominant discourses showing ways of understanding the world and our place within it. So in this lecture, I shall be exploring some of the meanings and politics of lifelong learning, arguing that lifelong learning in its current form is increasingly likely to enhance exclusion rather than inclusion. I shall go on to consider power, including where it's located, with whom and why, but also how power might be resisted or reclaimed. Finally, I shall outline what I see as the pedagogic challenges, arguing that real innovations in lifelong learning demand a return to some of the radicalism of earlier incarnations of lifelong learning, continuing education, and social justice. However, I shall begin by considering lifelong learning in a globalised world. When I sat down to write this lecture, a month or so back, the general election in the United Kingdom has recently come and gone with no decisive result, and with a resultant coalition government concerned about the global financial situation. And as those of you who were at the pre-launch on Thursday evening will have heard me say, a review of higher education in the UK, which will leave it fundamentally changed, with students left to pay higher fees and a cut in teaching budgets of around 80%. The financial downturn in Europe has left Greece, Portugal, Ireland in economic and social turmoil and has created uncertainty for the euro. Many countries across the world are showing high levels of political instability. And as 2010 draws to a close, there are likely to be increasing risks of non-payment of sovereign debt and rising political interference as a result of the growing fallout from the economic crisis. The collapse of Lehman Brothers in the United States in September 2008 seems to have triggered, or at least exacerbated, a global recession, which has been named by some as the Great Depression. If ever there was a demonstration of globalisation and its impact, this must be it. Ripples become waves, waves wax and wane, for some bringing catastrophic consequences, for others a mere wetting of the toes. The effects of a global recession are not uniform, with differing consequences for nations and for their peoples. The poorest are hit hardest, the economically and socially deprived, migrants, asylum seekers, women, children, the unemployed. There are estimates that by the end of 2010, more than 57 million people will be unemployed in OECD countries alone. And if the effects aren't uniform, then neither are the solutions to lessen the impact of economic crises. For some, including in the UK, it's a time to impose severe and swinging budget cuts, including to education. For others, it's a time to recognise that an educated population can aid economic and social recovery. Despite differing positions about the role of education and the management of educational institutions within nation states, in a globalised world, education itself has become globalised. In part, this is a result of mass movements of peoples and the subsequent spread of globalised discourses. Discourses, of course, are not neutral, and global discourses are dominated by the world views of primary groups. They are historical, social, and culturally defined ways of representing the world, specific ways of defining and producing knowledge, as though the representations and the definitions are truth. The predominant flow of ideas come from those countries with greater economic and social power, thus reinforcing and recreating dominant ideologies. Discourses have spread across the developed world about the role of education in enabling nation states to play a leading role in a globalised knowledge economy. The World Bank has frequently argued that lifelong learning is education for the knowledge economy. Globalisation and the increasing emphasis on global knowledge economies has undoubtedly been a consistent driver in more recent developments of lifelong learning. The World Bank has stated, "The global knowledge economy is transforming the demands of the labour market throughout the world, and also placing new demands on citizens who need more skills and knowledge to be able to function in their day-to-day lives. Equipping people to deal with these demands requires a new model of education and training, a model of lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is crucial to preparing workers to compete in the global economy, but it is important for other reasons as well. by improving people's ability to function as members of their communities. Education and training increase social cohesion, reduce crime, and improve income distribution. Nevertheless, education is inadequate in most developing countries, and knowledge economies are differently experienced across the world. Developing countries and countries with transition economies risk being further marginalised in a competitive global knowledge economy because their education and training systems are not equipping learners with the skills they need. Yet whatever the experience, whether there are stable, additional or decreasing funds in the education pot, lifelong learning has been viewed as an answer, at least in part, to global problems of recession. Policies across much of the world continue to emphasise a skills agenda linked to the economy, with individuals expected to make the most of the policy developments which have led to a growth in vocational education and training to benefit themselves, their nation states, and the knowledge economy. There are some activities that equate to learning in and for participation in a knowledge economy, and others that do not. And individuals are expected to make considered and proper choices about such participation. Although structural conditions impact on what may be perceived as individual choice, these are shaped by discourses of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism emphasises a decreasing role for governments and states in determining economic and therefore social policies, emphasising instead the role of individual autonomy and responsibility. Their role has become one of organising the conditions by which individuals and educational institutions can ensure that they have the capacities to respond to the changing needs of employers, thereby secure individuals' personal economic positions and the prosperity of the nation. Neoliberalism's discourses of markets, individual autonomy, and of choice mask structural and discursive inequalities of, for example, gender and social class, race and sexuality, religion and more, and the perceptions of free and individual choice is mere illusion. Freire describes neoliberalism as a transference of knowledge for industrial productivity. Education has come to be about technical knowledge, training learners in skills which enable them to adapt to economic globalisation, with neoliberal constructions of individual and forever flexible worker learners, leaving little space for innovations in lifelong learning. Whilst learners and teachers may struggle with dominant discourses of neoliberalism, governments too struggle with the competing challenges of the imperatives of individualised learning within neoliberalism, with global learner citizens, and with what this means for lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is a highly fluid and contestable concept, with multiple overlapping and differing meanings. Nevertheless, lifelong learning has been high on the political agenda in much of the world, constructed as an unconditional good for individuals, nation-states, and globally. It's described as though it is apolitical, ahistorical, and uncontestable, with little understanding of the ways in which learning is differently experienced by different groups and individuals, or constructed through gendered and other inequalities, and little account is given of a wide range of different histories and experiences. Nor is account taken